Somewhere in Paris, sometime around 1920, a young man is washing dishes to pay his rent. He's poor, he's foreign, he's brilliant, and the French Republic has just given him a first-class education in liberty, égalité, fraternité. He's going to use every word of it against them. His name is Nguyen Ai Quoc. You might know him better as Ho Chi Minh. This is the Roger Retrospective. I'm Roger Horn, coming to you from Raleigh, North Carolina, where the only revolution most people are staging this week is against their HOA's mulch policy. Today, episode 6, why the most advanced, prosperous societies on earth keep educating the very people who turn around and try to dismantle them, and why that pattern is played out again right now, 40 blocks from where I used to live. Let's start with the news. Because irony doesn't work without a fresh coat of paint. In June of this year, New York City's Democratic congressional primaries produced exactly what kind of commentator loves and a certain kind of Democrat fears. A state of democratic-socialist challengers, several backed by the city's own mayor taking on established incumbents. I'll say this plainly, because the mayor is sitting official, and this show doesn't do cheap shots at anyone currently doing the job. Whatever you think of his policies, the mayor's rise himself, or itself, from a backbench state assembly to City Hall in under 2 years is a genuinely historic story, and I'm not here to relitigate that man. I'm here for the pattern underneath him. Of course, I have my opinions. Because here's the thing nobody quite says out loud. Movements like this do not spring out of nowhere. They come out of somewhere very specific, usually a university, usually an expensive one, usually one that thought it was doing something else entirely. And that's today's episode. Friedrich Hayek had a theory about this back in the 1940s, and it's aged like a fine Bordeaux. He argued that the most vocal socialist sympathizer in any advanced economy tend to cluster not among the poor, but among what he called the secondhand dealers in ideas, journalists, professors, the credentialed class that makes a living translating ideas rather than building things. Thomas Sowell picked up that same idea decades later and sharpened it. Intellectuals, he said, are the one class of people whose track record rarely gets checked against outcomes. A doctor who's wrong loses patience. An engineer who's wrong loses bridges. A tenured professor who's wrong just gets cited by the next generation of tenured professors. And then there's Rob Henderson's contribution, which is one I actually enjoy saying out loud at dinner parties. Luxury beliefs, positions that function socially, exactly like a Birkin bag, a way for the comfortable to signal status, while the cost of those beliefs land almost entirely on people who can't afford the accessory. Put these three things together, and you get a fairly unflattering but fairly accurate mechanism. Prosperity produces surplus. Surplus produces a class of people insulated enough from consequences to experiment ideologically, and that class, disproportionately, comes out of the same 12 or so universities in this country. I spent decades in global finance, which means I spent a career watching countries try to import ideas that were incubated somewhere else, somewhere comfortable, and deploy them somewhere that wasn't. You learn very quickly that ideas survive contact with an actual balance sheet, or not. Now here's where it gets genuinely funny in the way that history is funny when nobody else intended to joke. The pattern just described isn't new, and it isn't domestic. It's the operating system of the 20th century. France trained Ho Chi Minh in Paris. It also trained a young Cambodian named Solet Sar, you know him as Pol Pot, who studied in Paris on a government scholarship before going home to build one of the darkest regimes of the century. I include that one deliberately, and this isn't a tidy, feel-good pattern. Sometimes the export is liberation, sometimes it's catastrophe. The mechanism doesn't discriminate, it just transmits. Britain educated Jawaharlal Nehru at Cambridge, and he went home to help end the Raj. Kwame Nkrumah's path was more circuitous. He earned his actual degrees at Lincoln University and University of Pennsylvania in the U.S., then spent a single term at the London School of Economics as a doctoral student before returning home without finishing it. Didn't matter. By the time he got back to the Gold Coast, he had absorbed enough Marxist and Pan-African thought on both sides of the Atlantic to found the Convention People's Party and led Ghana to independence. Julius Nyerere studied at Edinburgh before heading home to dismantle British colonial administration in Tanzania. The Netherlands trained Mohammed Hattab indirectly through the Dutch colonial education system, shaped Sukarno, both of whom led, that was, by the way, Mohammed Atta, not 9/11, but original Indonesian independence leader. France again trained Zhou Enlai and Deng Xiaoping through work-study programs in the 1920s. two men who would go on to help build and later rebuild the Chinese Communist state. And the Soviets, watching all this, built an entire university explicitly for this purpose. Patrice Lumumba University in Moscow, designed to train future leaders from the developing world in the ideology of the people funding their education. The French, the British, the Dutch, they all thought they were manufacturing loyal administrators. Instead, they built finishing schools for the people who'd eventually dismantle their empires. That is, without exaggeration, one of the great unintentional own goals in the history of statecraft. Here's my corner of the world, and here's where the story gets more interesting, because Latin America proves the mechanism runs in both directions. Raúl Prebisch, trained in Buenos Aires, shaped by European economic thought, became an intellectual architect of dependency theory and import substitution industrialization through ECLAC, the ideological scaffolding behind decades of state-led development across the region. Then, a generation later, the pendulum swings the other way entirely. A cohort of Chilean economists trained in the University of Chicago, Chicago boys, go home and implement the most aggressive free market shock therapy in Latin America had ever seen, under Pinochet, of course. Same mechanism, same continent, opposite ideology, one generation apart. If you want proof that elite foreign education exports disruption, it isn't a left-wing story or a right-wing story. That's your proof right there in one country. I've traveled myself more than 50 countries at this point, and I've walked around enough capital cities to tell you the same thing every time. You can always find the fingerprints of some foreign classroom on local politics, whether it arrived by way of Chicago or by way of Moscow. The imported idea always leaves a mark, it just doesn't always leave the same one. Now, before anyone writes in, I'm not arguing that everyone with a graduate degree is secretly plotting the overthrow of anything. And I'll be fair to the current New York moment specifically. The coalition behind this year's primary results wasn't just Ivy-educated staffers. It included plenty of working class and immigrant voters who have entirely legitimate grievances about the affordability in the city. The luxury beliefs critique lands hardest on the donor and activist class that shapes these movements and funds it, not necessarily on everyone who votes for them. That distinction matters, and I'd rather be precise than provocative for its own sake. What I am arguing is that the pattern, prosperity, insulation, elite education, ideological export, is one of the most durable and least discussed engines of political change in modern history. It built and unbuilt empires, it arguably reshaping New York City today, and it will keep happening because universities keep doing exactly what they've designed to do. Take talented, ambitious people and hand them the intellectual tools to question everything, including eventually the people who built the university. That's not a flaw in the system, that might just be the price of having one. I'm Roger Horn. This has been the Roger Retrospective from North Carolina. Go check your premises and maybe check your alma mater's course catalog while you're at it. Till next time.